thanks for coming if you're just walking in right now. LSAT Retake, of course, scores came back today, and we're looking at March and June and beyond. The number one question I get when it comes to retaking is people who've burned through too much material. Either you've burned through every LSAT exam ever released, or you've burned through all the recent ones and you're worried, how do I study? What do I do going forward? Obviously, there is the question that automatically comes up. How do I evaluate myself? Maybe you've done everything in the exams numbered in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, the majority from the past 5 years or so. That's okay. You can redo them. The value in doing any exam, whether recent or not, is not simply to diagnose your problem areas. It's to better understand the questions themselves. So that's my number one biggest piece of advice. Even if you've done every single exam, no reason to go to outside resources, stick with the actual LSAT content and still value the more recent stuff. Number two strategy, how many exams are there? There are 86 numbered exams, several that are unnumbered. So consider those also. If you do want more practice material, you've got June 07, you've got the SuperPrep exams from the late 90s, A, B, and C. You've also got exam C2 from the SuperPrep 2 book, and you've got the official LSAT PrepTest with explanations, which is the February 1997 exam. And you can find out-of-print copies of it used on Amazon. And I'm just sharing the link with you now. It'll be in the description below this episode later. Number three strategy, avoid fake practice tests like the plague. If a book does not say the prep test number, date administered, it's probably not real. Why shouldn't you use fake LSAT questions? Because they contain mistakes or they're unrealistic. Definitely not worth spending any time on those. If you get really good at logic games as a fun exercise, you might want to work through fake games just to spot the mistakes contained within them. If you go on Amazon and search for LSAT games books, you'll find some of the worst reviewed books where people talk about mistakes in the reviews. And so you can look at those reviews and say, most people don't want the book for that reason. I actually do want the book for that reason because I want to spot the errors in those games. So that could be a fun exercise if you're looking for more practice material. I have my own unofficial LSAT games that I've written, and I assure you those contain no mistakes at all. And so if you haven't done those, give them a look. I'll actually give you $1,000 if you spot an error in my unofficial LSAT logic games. That's how confident I am that they are valid and reliable. Wanted to share a couple strategies related to weaknesses. So strategy number 4 on IDing your weaknesses. Your exam, of course, might have been unreleased. The January LSAT was. If it was unreleased, I should say, that does not matter. You might think, well, I don't have a way to evaluate my weaknesses. I don't know what I got wrong. Yeah, it would be nice to know, but it really doesn't matter. You're better off just looking at the most recent 3 to 5 exams that you've taken. Those will give you the best indication of where you stand, and those will also give you a good sense of how you perform under pressure, what things you might get wrong, what things you might have difficulty with. Any exam, even the one you took on test day, is just one data point of maybe 100 questions, of course, but looking at 3 to 5 exams and averaging the results there give you a better sense of what your weak areas might be. And of course, the benefit there is you can review them in depth and you can see cases where you might have been down to 2, you can actually see your crossouts on the page. Number 5 strategy, don't just look at the questions you get wrong. Also look at anything you have difficulty with, anything where you were down to 2 and you guessed, those are worth evaluating too, because it could have just as easily have gone the other way. So evaluate everything you have difficulty with and everything you get wrong, all of them together. Number 6, when you're reviewing, diagnose where the problem is. Was it with the stimulus, if it's logical reasoning? Was it with the question stem? Or was it with the answer choices? There might be 1,000 different LSAT tricks the test makers use to make a problem difficult, and they're spread throughout the stimulus, question stem, and choices. One of the things they love to do is include a sufficient assumption in a necessary assumption question so you confidently pick that and move on, when of course you would have been better off going through all 5 choices. And so that kind of careless mistake of course, it really does have a major impact. And so for that reason, you want to see during your review process, which of the 1,000 tricks the test makers use are you uniquely prone to? Which brings me to number 7, going into the review process in more depth, analyzing when it comes to answer choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it, and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what was discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately made it correct. You want to do that again and again and again. The review process should take just as long, if not longer, than actually completing the problems in the first place. I was just speaking with a student earlier before this conversation we're having now, and he was telling me that he was going through lots of problems and looking at explanations, and he had the sense that maybe he wasn't reviewing in enough depth. And upon further discussion with him, I found out that not only was he looking at explanations, but he was only spending a few minutes on them, and he was not actually writing down anything for himself. So in your review process, your pen or pencil should be moving. And I really mean pen or pencil. Typing isn't even as good as this. You want to write down, engage your brain, multiple sensory inputs, write down, and maybe even like whisper to yourself if you're in a library or something you don't want other people to hear. Really talk through the process. I'm getting ahead of myself, but you could also talk to a friend, talk to an LSAT instructor, talk to other folks who are studying for this, but really engage with the problems. This is not something where you kind of sit at the back of the class in a lecture hall and you just passively absorb it. You have to actively engage in your review process. Anyway, I'll share more on that later. Strategy number 8, think about, as you go for a retake, what will you do differently this time? If your work schedule is too busy, your school schedule is too busy, think about tempering those down a bit. Maybe you can go to school part-time. Maybe you can cut back hours at work. If you're a paralegal who works long hours, stays late nights, maybe talk to your boss about this. If not, think about where you can squeeze more hours out of the day for studying. So maybe before work, during lunchtime, after work. Maybe for your retake, you want to look at what resources you could use differently this time. So if up to this point you've been randomly using random stuff you find online, random free stuff, forums, blog posts, videos, etc., maybe you want to get something a little bit more cohesive and comprehensive. Maybe you want to consider a course. Maybe you want to consider using a different prep book. If in the past you were not using actual LSAT questions or using some random book you got from a friend, maybe you want to invest a bit more in buying the best LSAT prep book possible for yourself. A lot of times people will say, should I buy yet another book of 10 exams or another prep book altogether? And the way I look at it is another prep book for $20 or $50, if it could change the entire course of your career and get you even just a point or two more on the LSAT, it is absolutely worth doing so. This is a drop in the bucket. The ROI on any investment you make in a resource is huge. You're investing your time in this. How do you even value your time? If you spend 3 hours with a prep book that isn't that great, you could have instead spent those 3 hours to buy one book that would end up saving you 3 hours in the long run. It's well worth it. So I will strongly encourage you, seek out additional resources. If there's something that you've been considering but haven't gotten it yet, invest yourself in that process. Back when I was studying for the LSAT, I got my hands on every LSAT exam ever released. And I got all the LSAT prep books I could find, both the good ones and the bad ones. And I started off with some of the bad ones, maybe a Barron's or something. And over time, I came to learn just how important it is to use the best resources possible, which of course do include actual LSAT questions. Let's see, number 9, study schedules. A lot of times people will just do exam after exam and measure the results, get happy or sad about those results, and then move on. It's worth starting off with the basics. Start properly, build the foundation first, then move on to timing and pacing and endurance. So any study plan, whether you're retaking or not, should involve 3 parts. You build the foundation, untimed, focus on accuracy. Then you bring it together with a full individual timed section, 35 minutes. Let's say you did games untimed by type, you learn the basics. Now you want to do a timed section of 4 games, an actual section, and then see how you did in the 35-minute mark and work from there. Then finally, phase 3, you do endurance, 5 section exams with just the break and have that be it. Now, number 10 strategy, let's say you've already learned the basics since you are retaking. You want to focus on identifying your weak areas as we discussed, focus on those, and mix in a timed exam or two per week along the way. Don't overly stress about the specifics. People will say, should I do a timed section? Should I do questions by type? Should I do timed exams? Should I read foundational material? It's all good. It's all good. It's all useful. Not one is not better than the other. I'd say there's a place for all of that. So if you have a weak area, maybe a certain question type or a certain section, let's say it's a certain question type. Let's say it's flaw questions or strengthen questions. You could do a bunch of those by type. I have categorizations on my website, so you drill those. If you feel that your foundation is lacking in one of those types, then you read some foundational materials on that first, maybe an article on my site or a chapter in a prep book. If, let's just say, you have trouble with reading comp as a whole, you could read some foundational material on reading comp, or maybe watch my reading comprehension course or videos, then do some timed sections to work on those. But still, of course, a timed exam or two a week is definitely a good idea, especially if you're going for March, because there isn't too much time remaining there. Speaking of which, number 11 strategy, if you have 1 month till March, if you've got the time, go for that. You've got, I think, about 6 weeks or so. It's possible. It's possible to improve a few points between now and March 30th. So if you've got the time in your schedule to study for it, go for that. Otherwise, you've got about 3.5 months until June. And I would suggest try to be done by June if you can, because that's the last exam that's paper and pencil for everyone. The digital LSAT starts in July, and of course, things are going to change, which brings me to number 12 strategy, talking about the digital LSAT, what to be aware of, what to avoid. The July exam is the first exam that's going to be digital. Half of test takers will get the digital exam on the tablet, half will get paper and pencil, and LSAC chooses for you. They assign it, and you don't get any advance notice. And I don't know about you, but I would not want to be in that situation, walking in on test day not knowing what I'm going to be facing. So if you're anything like me, try to avoid that ambiguity and either go for June, which is paper and pencil, or go for September, which is 100% digital. And to be honest, I don't love the digital format as it currently exists. It's somewhat restrictive in a lot of ways. It's on a tablet, but you can't draw freehand on the tablet. You can't write on the tablet the way that you're writing on your LSAT problems. You will get scrap paper, but of course, it's not the same thing going back and forth between them. So let's say you can't do it by June, you got to do it in July or September, and you're getting digital. Of course, you'll make the best of it, but I think it's better avoided if possible. And right now, we're in February. You've got enough time to prep for June. 3.5 months is even a good amount or decent amount if you're starting from scratch. And of course, if you're retaking, that's not your position. You presumably have some familiarity with the exam. And so for that reason, I think if you can, go for March or June. I wanted to talk a bit about taking your prep to the next level. So number 13 strategy is write your own LSAT questions, write your own answer choices, write your own games. One fun exercise could be, let's say for a logical reasoning question, write a tempting wrong answer choice, maybe even one that you'd be prone to making, one that you might fall for. Or you could write your own LSAT logic game from scratch, your own original game. I've actually had students do this, and it's been a great educational exercise for them. And I actually had my own experience writing games where I learned a lot in the process as well. And that's why my games are actually tougher in a lot of ways than actual LSAT games, because I tried to include all the tricks in them, not just a few. And I'm including a link in the chat here and in the description below this episode to those games if you want to check them out. Another next level strategy is, could you explain this to a friend? Number 14 strategy, explain things to a friend, find a colleague, find a study buddy, and talk through the problems with them. It's really a valuable exercise to force yourself to articulate that. But if your friends are sick of hearing about the LSAT and they're not interested, I get that. I have a hard time finding people who want to hear me talk about the LSAT in my personal life, which is part of why I do what I do with my site and podcast and YouTube and all that. So one other thing you can do is write your own LSAT explanations. This is an enormously valuable exercise to really walk through your thought process. And I have a video where I actually feature a student written explanation. And it's not the most perfect explanation in the world, but he found it to be a really valuable exercise to really articulate it for himself. And so I've sent a link to a video here in the chat. I'll include it in the description for this episode, where I actually walk through what the explanation looked like. And so those are 15 strategies for an LSAT retake. And I did it in just about 15 minutes, so I'm pretty proud of myself on that. I'm going to take a few minutes to walk through some resources that could help you, some study schedules and courses, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So study schedules, I have a few to offer you for retake. I have a day-by-day LSAT retake schedule. It's based on a 12-week timeline, which makes it a decent fit for the June exam. But if you're going for March instead, you can easily compress it. The idea is basically working on your weak areas and then cycling in timed sections and timed exams. And so I've sent you a link. I'm sharing a link to a day-by-day plan that lays out exactly what to do in terms of which resources to use, which exams to use, and how to ID and focus on your weak areas. I've also got a few free retake LSAT schedules to share with you. I have them on a week-by-week plan. I have one regular retake plan that is reasonable, that I could actually see someone doing, and I could imagine them doing it without going nuts or burning out. I also have an intense retake week-by-week schedule, totally free, sharing the link with you here. And I wrote it for a student years ago who wanted to basically do every single exam ever for her retake prep. And I was like, I don't know about that, but she was a student of mine. I wanted to help her out. She wanted this, so I created it, and then I posted it to share it with all of you. So I'm sharing the link for that as well. And finally, of course, I have some LSAT courses. They're online, they're recorded. They cover the basics for every section of the exam: games, reasoning, reading comp, giving you an overview. And so if you haven't done an LSAT course before, or what you did not work for you, you could consider trying these out. They're very affordable. They cover the basics. They are concise and they are bite-sized. I'm not long-winded. I'm pretty concise and to the point, like my videos, like all my stuff. I boil it down as simply as possible. So check those out if you haven't already. You might find that they help you and give you the key to unlocking what you need for your retake. A couple of free things I want to highlight. I have a new LSAT podcast, and I'm sharing the link with you there. I also have a very active YouTube channel where I'm constantly releasing new stuff every single day. They're both just videos with me one-on-one with all of you, or they are interviews with other law school admissions folks or lawyers, people in the field. And so that's a great place to check out for additional help. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I wanted to share on my end. I'll open it up to Q&A now. I see one question here in the chat, but please do feel free to ask more questions. Got one question from Alia. Do some schools accept students with lower LSAT scores than the median if that person has a high GPA, good letters of rec, and personal statements? That's a great question. So can the other factors outweigh your LSAT score? To some extent, yes. The LSAT is the most important factor, but the GPA and other soft factors do play a role. I'd say it could be something like, it's hard to put firm numbers on this sort of thing. I'd say maybe it's 50 LSAT, 40 GPA, 10% the other stuff. Different people will give different rough estimates, but it's something along those lines. Maybe for other schools, it might be 60 LSAT, 30 GPA, 10 soft factors. Different schools have their own admissions indices. Each school has its own admissions index, to put it in the singular, and it'll vary from school to school. LSAC on their site, they have a free resource. It's an LSAT and GPA calculator. If you just Google LSAT GPA calculator, you'll find it, and you can input your GPA, which might be fixed at this point if you're out of school already, and your LSAT score, which of course is not fixed if you're planning on retaking, but you can input different numbers for each and then see what your chances may be at various schools. But the numbers do unfortunately determine the vast majority of your admissions chances. So if you're considering a retake, if you think it might make the difference, then certainly do that as well. Got a question here from Patrick. Is there ever a point when you should not retake the LSAT? If you scored a 171, should you retake in the hopes of getting a higher score? Great question. So if you got a 171, that's awesome. Obviously, you're in, I think, the 97th percentile. So you're ahead of most people. If your GPA is low, though, let's say your GPA was a 3.0 and you have a 171. That does not make you an automatic shoo-in for a top 14 or a top 5 school. So if you want to go to a top 14 or top 5, then it would definitely be worth retaking with a 171. You get a 175 or a 176 or even a 173. That'll make a difference. Believe it or not, even just 1 point different on the LSAT can make a big difference in your scholarship money or getting into a better law school. It could get you $5,000 more, $10,000 more. Restudying for the LSAT and retaking, of course, is not the ideal situation, but it's worth it. The ROI on that's huge. And so I would say, yeah, if you can get 1 point more and your GPA is at the median or below, it's well worth it. Yeah. Especially if you can hopefully be done in the next 6 weeks or so. It's not that much longer to extend your study timeline. Someone asked, what's the name of the calculator again? It's just LSAT GPA calculator. You could Google it. I don't have my internet browser open because I wanted to keep the webinar here going smoothly, but check them out. There's a few of them out there. So I would say play around with each of them. And you could also talk to admissions people, talk to them directly and see, I've got this GPA, I've got this LSAT score. What are my odds? And some of them will tell you flat out, you know what, we'd love to have you, but you've got a 158. We really need you to have a 160. Or maybe at a top school, you've got a 171, but your GPA is kind of low, so we really need you to have a 175 or 173, but then you got a 175, then the scholarship money starts coming out. The schools, they really do count on your LSAT score and GPA to bring up their medians in the rankings, and so they'll pay you. They'll essentially pay you for a higher score. It's nuts, but that's just the name of the game. Got a question from Miguel. What do you recommend for a senior citizen who's been out of school for over a couple of decades and wants to take a crack at the LSAT for possibly attending law school during the evening? Well, kudos to you for getting back into this. It's definitely not easy to jump back into academics if you've been out of it for a while. And so for that reason, you're going to want to invest more time in studying. You're going to want to maybe you want a longer timeline and you don't feel as much pressure to get it done as someone younger who feels like everything rests on what happens in the next year, which, as you age a bit, you come to learn, at least I have, that you can delay things. 1 year doesn't make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. And so I'd say slow down your timeline a bit. That's the biggest advice I would give you. So if you've been thinking about March, but you have a feeling that maybe you need more time, go for June. Take the time to dig into the books and devote yourself fully to this. If you're in the lucky position to maybe be able to study full-time or 20 hours a week, then take that time and work through the problems slowly and deliberately and really engage in your review process more than anything else. And you also mentioned you're going to law school in the evening. So maybe that's a part-time program. Part-time programs tend to be a little bit more flexible, and they also tend not to require the same LSAT scores and GPAs that their full-time programs do. And so if you see medians for a given school, I think, for example, here in New York, Fordham, I think, has a part-time program. The medians that you need for a part-time program are not as high. The scores that you need for a part-time program are not as high as those for a full-time program. And so just keep that in mind. And if you talk to admissions, they'll probably tell you that as well. And someone asked, what do you think about the Khan Academy Prep? I think it's great that they're offering it. I think more free resources are always good, but I'm hesitant to recommend it for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it's coming from LSAC, the test makers. It's created in conjunction with them, and their goals are not the same as your goals. They want the LSAT to serve the function of separating everyone along the score band from 120 to 180. And so, of course, they want to provide some baseline advice, but they're not really going to get as deep into it as someone on the outside will. And they're not really going to give you the keys to the castle to unlock the exam for you. I was speaking with a friend of mine who used to write actual LSAT questions, and he really got into the nitty-gritty with me of the tricks they use for wrong answer choices, what they use to make wrong answer choices tempting, and what they use to make right answer choices discouraging. And you're not getting that from the LSAC written stuff. If you look at SuperPrep or their handbook, they give you everything in very technical terms, but they're not really going deep in the way that I do, for example. And so if you have a limited budget and more time than money, then yeah, go for the Khan Academy stuff. But I'm hearing from a lot of students that it's not really enough and they're looking for additional resources as well. And so try it out, see if it works for you, but I'd look elsewhere as well. Got a question about the July LSAT. Do I think people will avoid it because of the tech transition? Well, so I do think people will avoid it because of the tech transition. I do think the ambiguity might reduce it for some people, especially because you do have the June LSAT just about a month before. And so you could either go for June or September. I think the frequency of the LSAT being offered makes the other LSAT test dates more appealing than July in particular. Then the follow-up question there is that a reason not to do it? I think it's a reason not to do it. I mean, your opinions may differ. And if you don't really care about the ambiguity and you don't care that you might walk in getting one or the other, then by all means, go for it. One interesting side benefit of the July LSAT is that that'll be the only time they let you see your score before deciding whether to cancel. So I'd say for that reason, it's not a bad idea. I got one question from Patrick about one-on-one coaching sessions. Great question, Patrick. I do offer one-on-one. And I have a link on my website at the top navigation bar with that if you want to check that out. And of course, feel free to reach out directly if you have any questions at all. As for help with the personal statement, I do help with the personal statement and other aspects of the application. My focus is on the one-on-one LSAT coaching though. So I typically limit my application help to people I'm already working with. But if you have a unique situation and you think you might want the one-on-one with me, then of course, feel free to reach out and we can discuss it further. Again, everyone, thanks for joining. This was a lot of fun and we'll definitely do more in the future. All the best to you with your retake prep. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions as you move forward. Take care, guys. Bye. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.